especially in the financial sector. But in terms of ANZ organisations, Australia and New Zealand, we're finding a unique constraint that other markets do not have, like that disconnection between the perception of what the customer needs and what ANZ customers actually want. Customers have revealed their priorities and how they differ in a few key ways when it comes to CX and innovation within a business. As part of this panel discussion, they're going to look at how business leaders and fintechs generally can focus their innovation to meet customer expectations through strategy, privacy, cybersecurity, collaboration, and overall innovation. And just before we kick off, I know we're running a little bit behind, so what we're going to do is we're going to run on, so Elizabeth, keep the whole thing show on the road for an extra 15 minutes. And when we break at 10:30, well, we'll break at 10:45. It'll be a short coffee and cake hit before we come back in 11. On with the show. Over to you guys. Have fun.
Thank you.
Put your hands together.
Hello and welcome to the second day of Intersect, and thanks for coming in for the early session. My name is Elizabeth. I'm the Global FinTech Editor at Finder, and I'll be your moderator today. The name of this panel, as we were just told, is Innovation Must Be Emboldened by the Customer Experience. Every fintech has to be innovative. That's the name of the game, right? But how do fintechs in Australia focus their innovation to meet and exceed the needs of their customers? That's what we'll find out today. So let me introduce our panel. Over here we have Tim Dwyer. He is the co-founder and CEO of LimePay, a merchant payment platform with robust features, including Buy Now, Pay Later. Tim has had leading roles in some high-profile companies, including Hilton, World First, and ASOS. Lottie Laws, just the third member there. She's the Australian and New Zealand Sales Director at Pinterest, a global social network that lets users share almost everything, including recipes, fashion, and home inspiration. Lottie's resume is very extensive and includes Twitter, Apple, and Vogue. Kallan Hogan is the head of FinTech for Mastercard Australia. Kallan has extensive experience in the financial space, including over 10 years at American Express, where he was Director of New Business Development. And we also have Steve McGovern, who is replacing James Slaney for Dubber. So Steve is the co-founder and CEO at Dubber, which is the world's leading provider of cloud-based call recording. Dubber Voice AI gives businesses access to previously untapped voice data. Welcome to our panel. Lottie, I want to start with you. So Pinterest is in a very interesting space. It's a social media platform. Who do you see as your target customer, and how do you evolve your product just for them?
Loud. The target customer is really anybody. I think there's a misperception that it's just females, maybe 30s or 40s, but actually it's increasingly everyone. An emerging trend, for example, in Australia, specifically over the past year, is the growth in the Gen Z audience. And something that might be interesting to this audience in particular is that they are almost our kind of most financially savvy of all of our audience. They're the most likely to use fintech services. They care the most about financial well-being. So the audience is becoming a lot more varied. As you might expect, a key reason people go there is to think about product and get inspiration and ideas. So that also has evolved the way we think about our product and develop our product over the past year, especially in terms of what tech we integrate with and how we make shopping experiences and e-commerce a lot easier for our users.
Steve, I'm also interested in Dubber. So it's a global business. I mean, how do you innovate your product so it'll work in multiple geographies?
Yeah, so we're a platform that connects into, or telcos globally connect into our platform, and on the face of it, we look like a call recording company. And what does that mean? It means that instead of scoping out, requirements, you can just switch it on as a service as you would, voicemail or something like that. But really, we're about capturing the insights as well. So if you think about our company, because we're talking about customer experience here, we have the opportunity to be the Siri, if you like, or the Alexa for AT&T's mobile network or Verizon's mobile network. And this is a huge amount of data that's untapped at the moment. So the biggest message I think that we have is that customers or businesses don't know what they don't know, because they're just coming to terms with what real data is from their customers, because a lot of the data has been led by their own processes. And I think what we expose when we get real customer insights it's amazing what you hear on the other end of the phone, or it's amazing what you hear in meetings, and we're also a compliance platform for Zoom and Microsoft Teams, etc. And I think the whole world's changing in the way it communicates, and I think the insights that we're looking to expose can actually define how businesses look to produce their products. For us, it's simple. It needs to be scalable, and it needs to be delivered as a service directly from a telco network as you would any other product. Obviously, we're challenged by GDPR, data sovereignty, etc. It's a very hot topic in our world because of the data we're capturing. But I think you've got to innovate at scale. You've got to, it was interesting listening to Lottie. It's about everyone. You've got to try and democratize what you're doing if you can. And we do that. The perception is that we are, a niche for contact center. That's the last thing we do. We're about actually, if you like, being the Siri or the Alexa for every mobile network globally. And that's what we do.
I want to touch on something you said. Businesses don't know what they don't know. And I want to open this up to the entire panel. This session is about customer needs driving innovation, but do you think customers actually know what they want? And how much do you rely on your own intuition versus customer feedback? Who wants to jump in?
I can go quickly. I think something really interesting that was highlighted in the report, the Harvard Business Report, was that the innovations or the kind of change in behaviors that businesses have been putting out there in Australia are not necessarily aligned to what consumers are kind of asking for and what they want more of. So I think one example was, consumers, only a small amount want to hear more from brands and businesses, whereas the past year has meant that businesses have really kind of over-egged in that, and they have gone full throttle on communicating more with their customers. And I think maybe the past year and all the kind of adversity has encouraged that kind of instinctive survival that companies have, where they're kind of looking at their bottom line and reacting versus, I guess, listening more to either the data that their consumers are feeding in or the customer insights that are available to them. So I think it's kind of a survival instinct, and when you're in times of adversity, the natural reaction is to kind of look inwards, and I guess it's quite easy in the circumstances that businesses are perhaps not doing that, and they're perhaps not prioritizing listening as much as they could.
Would anyone else like to jump in?
Sure, look, happy to comment on that one as well. And it's a good question around, do customers kind of know what the next sort of vision or sort of part of innovation that would improve their experience is? And one thing that we care about deeply at LionPay is looking at the customer experience and working back from that as best as we can. It's not, what is something great that we can engineer and then work forward from that. So it's always sort of embedded the innovation on how do you sort of create the best sort of seamless, Uber-like customer experience. And I think, to Lottie's point, brands today are in a pretty noisy space. Everyone has made this enormous push online. Everyone's sort of trying to compete to have their unique brand story resonate with their customers. So it's really creating innovation that sort of cuts through the noise and focuses in on that signal. And that's one of the things that we do. It's saying when it comes to a payment experience, whether it's a buy now, pay later, it should be that seamless kind of walk out of the Uber type experience for that brand. And that brand knows that, I don't just use buy now, pay later the entire time. I use it for certain products at certain times of the year, for my wife's birthday or whatever it happens to be. And knowing that at that moment, that's when that brand should say, hey, here's some really great payment options for these type of products. And for the rest of the time, it's, creating that sort of, that connection, but it's innovating along the sort of whole experience of start to finish with that brand, and not innovating outside of that brand tone is kind of how we see innovation. So.
Thanks. And just to add to that, customers don't always know what they don't know. That's clear. But I think at Mastercard, what we try to do with clients and with fintechs is make sure that we really understand what their needs are. And it was great to hear Joseph yesterday saying, you really got to have a vision of where you want to take your company. And if you work with a partner like Mastercard, you probably don't know about account takeover and remote access scams and all of the different things. But we're there to kind of guide you along the way and introduce you to services that you may not have thought of. But all along, understanding your key need, not your wants, not that you want more money or you want this, but your clear need is to be this company, and these are the things that you need to think about, and these are the people we can introduce you to.
I think from my perspective, the customers have never been more empowered. It's just that some of them don't know about it. And I think that should really drive innovation in companies as well. I think that customers can actually dictate how technology serves them as much as the other way around. And I think that analysts in any tech sector now are talking about ubiquitous platforms or services that everyone can connect to rather than proprietary. I mean, we all know that. And I think that convenience, it's just the key word, isn't it? It's convenience and obviously in fintech, et cetera, security. But really it's about the customers, or it's about us delivering products and services that the customers can use easily and are happy to use and are happy to integrate with everything else that they use as well. That to me would be where customers' empowerment is today.
I want to talk a little bit about data as well. This session is based on a 2021 report by Become, which is powered by Mastercard. So one of the findings of the report is that 75% of Australian and New Zealand executives see customer insight as a vehicle for innovation. Lottie, I'm interested in kind of what data you rely on specifically to drive that innovation.
I think the past year has been really interesting for us because well, for me personally, my clients are brands that we work with generally. But last year I was working at Twitter. This year I'm working at Pinterest. They're both extremely consumer, user-centric companies, and their product roadmaps exist entirely around what users want. So that kind of informs how we change products. So for example, all the data and all the user behaviors on Pinterest show us that a customer wants to get inspired and then they want to buy the thing that they see immediately. So that informs the product roadmap decisions that we make. For me, as a person who works with brands and advertisers, it's been a strange year because some brands have succeeded. There's been a lot of challenger brands that have been emerging and kind of winning. And then for other brands, it's been a lot harder. So we've had to be kind of really empathetic. But one thing that we have been able to kind of share, and really a way we've been able to be useful to these brands, is to tell them how consumers are reacting, how their shopping behaviors change, how maybe they don't intentionally know, but we can kind of see trends that show how they may want their shopping and online e-commerce experiences to change. And this is all kind of very rich first-party data and insight that we can pass on to brands and advertisers. So in the past year, which has been difficult for a lot of brands, this has been the way that we can kind of be most useful to our partners.
Tim, I just want to turn to you for a second. LiPay is a payment solution for businesses, but you're playing in the buy now, pay later space. So how do you develop your product using customer data versus something like market trends?
It's a good question. I think the way that we see LionPay, and it's a great sort of comparison in market, is that LionPay is, and we're looking at the branding of it as sort of powered by LionPay. And the idea of that is it's like the original Intel sticker that you would see on a computer that, you'd know that there was that trust and that sort of, when I press the button, it's going to turn on. And it sort of was inside the box that did all the great power, and the sort of innovation came from within. But in terms of what the customer experience, it's very much on the outside. And that's how we see the way payments should evolve. It should be something that's the customers buying, at the end of the day, and our argument is they're buying directly from these brands. I'm buying something from Nike. I'm not buying from third parties that facilitate this payment. So brands should really own that end-to-end experience. And in terms of the data, it's more, we see it as, how do you drive sustainable lifetime value when it comes to payments? How do you create that loyalty, that connection, that deeper sort of offering to that brand? Because at the moment, that's not what we feel, that's not what's happening. And that merchant is the one that has that relationship with the customer. So all the insights and all that data should be flowing back to the merchant around how people are choosing to pay. And I think payments, especially buy now, pay later, has fundamentally changed how we pay. We just want a credit relationship that starts and finishes with that product. And I think that's a great thing. And the data around that is still so early, and it's knowing, you know, my sort of payment preferences at different times of the year, and then how does a merchant engage with that new type of payment is, I think is super important. And brands, I think, are now starting to see just how important that is. It's like, you know, like Uber, where I walk out and that payment experience is just absolutely seamless. It should be the same for all merchants, and they should be at the forefront of that experience. So, yeah.
So another finding by the Become report was that while over 51% of Australian and New Zealand businesses are prioritising innovation, we lag behind on tracking the business impact of innovation. Kallan, I wanted to ask you how you treat innovation at Mastercard and how do you measure its success?
Thanks. And for those of you who aren't aware of the Harvard Business Review collaboration we did, please ping me on the app. I can send you the report. We interviewed over 1,000 consumers here in Australia and 264 businesses, and we also did this globally. It was, you know, 10,000 consumers plus and 1,800 businesses. So at Mastercard, we look at two ways around innovation. One is culture, making sure we have a culture of innovation. We're lucky enough here in Australia that, you know, we're a big brand here in Australia. We're a big payments company and service provider. But that's not who we are globally. You know, in the US, where we come from, our market share is half that of our traditional competitor. So we have a real challenger brand culture. We like to do things differently. We have been lucky enough to acquire a number of very innovative companies, you know, AI companies like Brighterion, biometrics companies, loyalty companies, etc. So we've ingested the best parts of their culture and how they think and act. And then we also look externally further still. We have StartPath, our FinTech accelerator program. It was actually voted by the International Chamber of Commerce as the best FinTech accelerator globally, where we look at 1,500 startups who are ready to scale every year, and we take on about 30 of those into our, I guess we put our arms around them and help them scale. The likes of Airwallex, Revolut are part of that alumni. And so that's the culture side, and then the rigor side, and that's where the Harvard comes in. We always like to benchmark, are we doing the right things as a company? And it came out in the Harvard Business Report, in that study, that there are five things that leaders do for the top companies in the world that drives innovation. And so we make sure we're doing all of these. It's digital agility, surround sound analytics, customer proximity, making sure everything's ironclad secure, and then the last one is strategic investments, which I touched on. So.
Steve, is it a similar case for you? You know, does that all sound like what you're using to kind of measure the business impact of innovation?
I think we've got a really clear measurement of how end users and customers are moving towards innovation, because, as I said at the start, we look like we're a call recording company because we have to record calls to get the data. But it's really measuring that movement from people looking to just use that data for regulatory reasons, to store it and never look at it or never use it because they have to, under MiFID II in Europe, for example, as a regulation. And obviously, so we can measure it really tangibly by seeing the amount of usage that moves into what you would call the AI stuff. So we've got customer experience measurements, and obviously we are bound by every regulator in the world in terms of the data that we capture, because a lot of financial services companies, are looking to use our service for obvious reasons. So really, it's two categories. Those people who need to store the data just for regulatory reasons, and maybe there's a little bit of inertia there in terms of actually using that data. And then you've got customers themselves who are trying to innovate their own business. And I think COVID's exposed businesses that use insights to change or pivot the way they operate. So for us, it's really clear. You've got people who store data because they need to, and you've got people who store data because they want to, and they want to use it and get benefit from it. That's how we measure it.
You mentioned COVID there. I wanted to open this question to the whole panel. This session is about customer needs driving innovation, but obviously we all went through a pandemic. So I wanted to ask, how did your strategy for innovation change? Did you have to throw plans out the window? What happened? Lottie, do we want to start with you?
Sorry. Yeah, I think it came down to kind of, again, scrutinizing the end-to-end customer journey on our platform, customer being the pinner, and really understanding how their behaviors have changed. For us and for everyone, we've seen the rise in e-commerce, and it's our responsibility to kind of react to that. We being a platform where people go to think about product and to think about creating something, being a new home or a big new chapter in their life, like weddings, babies. So that has, I think, expedited some partnerships and some technology that we've introduced. One of them being our integration with Shopify, which can integrate with millions, maybe billions of merchants around the world, to enable them to not even have to use our platform to push their product onto Pinterest. So if you have a Shopify account, you can make a very seamless kind of shopping experience on Pinterest. So I think the kind of main thing that has been expedited is scrutinizing the customer journey. How do they get from being inspired to making a purchase, and then trying to filter out and kind of get rid of any points of friction. And anything that's not absolutely necessary. Also things like, I think the report points out that trust is a kind of emerging concern of consumers. The more that they shop online, the more they're worried about, security of their data and privacy. So we've just introduced, in Australia, it's about to roll out a verified merchant program where it's kind of added visual assurance that the place that you may end up buying things that you're interested in, they're a verified kind of trustworthy source. So those things have moved a lot quicker.
Tim.
Yeah, so look, it was interesting through the pandemic that which showed for a lot of merchants this enormous rise in interest. I mean, everyone was buying gym equipment, they were going onto Pinterest to redo their home studies, and everyone sort of went through that surge of sort of that purchase. And I think one thing that we're focused on is how do brands not make that just a moment in time, just a fleeting moment? How do they now build a connection with all those customers that just sort of rushed onto their website? And I think that's sort of to Lottie's point, that's understanding the end-to-end customer journey. It's deepening that relationship with merchants. It's not getting in the way. It's providing that data and those insights back to merchants. And it's pretty exciting because there's so much more to be done for brands to kind of connect their story to these new customers that all of a sudden were shopping online for the very first time. And it's just embracing that shift in behavior, but in a way that is kind of sort of start to finish, is the innovation is sort of within that merchant and that sort of that whole sort of flow, which is seamless, and I see what I want, I buy it how I want. That's where we really feel like the kind of evolution of buy now, pay later is with the merchant, because everyone's buying straight off the merchant, right? So to know how I like to pay, to know I can just use any card and We're also doing a lot of innovation as well, just the last point, because I think it's worth mentioning, for our in-store solution. People still, go in store, and I think they will forever and a day. And I think we're doing some work with Mastercard that will just take the whole kind of innovation, brand experience, play to a completely different level. And it won't just be different; it'll be better. So we're excited for that. So yeah.
That does sound exciting. Kallan, so COVID and Mastercard, how did it impact your innovation?
Well, thankfully, we learned after about 2 months that having 20 hours of Zoom calls a day wasn't healthy for anybody, and having 14 committees wasn't healthy either. So we were really lucky, though, that we were well on our journey on the digital side. We knew that 69% of shopping carts get abandoned because customers don't like putting in 16-digit PANs and sharing data. So, we'd started this infrastructure. I won't bore you with the name because it's another acronym. Where customers, businesses don't have to share their credentials with merchants to buy things. It's all tokenized. So using the Apple Pay, Samsung Pay technology, but in a card-not-present environment. And we'd started that ecosystem journey sort of 2-3 years before COVID hit. So we actually had some, tailwinds with that. We also had, tailwinds. In debit, because a lot of cash was coming out of the system. So, it was an incredibly, and I think we should all have a conversation about how hard last year was. I think we've just kind of moved on and got amnesia from it. I think just have a chat in the breaks about, this time last year. And we were fortunate. I think we were one of those companies that had tailwinds. We had to work really hard, and we had to partner and do things differently with clients because their needs changed. And so we had to be, incredibly agile, and we were smashing out 20-hour days. It was hard, but we had tailwinds because of the work we'd done the years before.
It was a hugely dynamic year for Dubber. I mean, we're part of the transformation of telecommunications to cloud, so we're already on the journey. What COVID did, of course, is accelerate it. Suddenly you've got everyone working from home, people requiring the same tools, the same level of connectivity, in fact, increased connectivity in many cases as well. And so, the appetite for the services of our partners, whether it be, as I say, the telcos like AT&T, Verizon, Telstra, etc., or whether it be Zoom, it was just voracious, really, the appetite for it. And I think coming out of it is even bigger, because I think that people are recognizing now that those Band-Aids, those makeshift tools that you used for a year, are now they're here for the long term. This is not getting smaller, it's getting bigger. We are going to be working from home, hopefully not totally, that's my view, but at least partially. People are going to need communication from various distributed locations. So, so for us, really, it was an accelerator into an industry, or of an industry that was already moving that way at a slower pace. I think focusing on the insights, of course, and customer experience, which is what this is about. You can imagine an airline in Australia that's had a contact centre where they listen to all calls and get insights, etc. Suddenly those people are working from home. I think, as Kallan was saying, when we talk about how hard the year's been, think about those contact centre people who are sitting in their own front room actually taking calls in an industry where everyone wants their money back. And so insights not just on the customers, but on the people working in the organisation that has an impact on the customers as well. I just think any business that's really chosen to pivot using its own assets, and its own assets are its information, its data, I think they're the winners in COVID, and certainly we've seen that as well.
Just on that airline analogy, staying with that, this time last year, our spend on airlines was at negative 110%. Now, how can it be at negative 110%? It's because of chargebacks. So, that's just another example from this time last year.
And just to close out the panel, I was interested in a business innovation that you saw introduced, during the pandemic during 2020 that impressed you. It can be from your own company.
Yeah, I can kickstart that one. And I think we've all experienced this, which is I've never scanned a QR code more in my entire life in a day than I have since the pandemic, kind of swept through. And it's pretty incredible because I think it's made us all rethink what a QR code can actually do for us. And our engineers got pretty excited one day and they said, you know what, for our in-store experience, we can take the Service New South Wales QR code and onboard a merchant or a client and customer. And I was like, I think hacking the QR code of Service New South Wales is probably a bad idea. But I think, that sort of origination of using QR for the pandemic and that kind of new thought around QR codes, I think there's a lot more that's going to happen in that space, whether it's a poster in a brand, like on the front of a window, whether it's online using QR. Like I think it's something here to stay. So I think that's some innovation that kind of was born out of the whole COVID space. So yeah.
I have to agree with that. I think the funny thing about QR codes to me is personally it feels like quite an old thing that I just didn't even want to get on board with prior to the past year. But I think the cool thing is that it's quite specific actually to Australia. So I have most of my family back in the UK, and the spread of COVID there is obviously extremely different, has been a lot more serious, and I think we sometimes take for granted what seems like a very small innovation like that, and just actually how effective it is when it comes back to tracking. And then another thing that sort of is not brand specific but has sort of made me proud is feeling like Australia has kind of rallied around small businesses. Even thinking about things like the gig economy and how people have kind of, there's been a push to help our communities and help our small businesses in our suburbs. I think, I don't know if that's super specific to Australia, but it feels very Australian, and I love how kind of technology, even companies like kind of Uber and Deliveroo have to some extent kind of made this big push in that space. So that's just a feeling of kind of pride that I've had, I think, during this past year.
I'm going to go completely off-grid here because there's been lots of technical innovation in the last 12 months. The thing that's impressed me most, frankly, is how small businesses have actually pivoted, as I said, to use their assets. I mean, our office is just on the next block here near Lucy Lou's, where I think everyone had a great night last night by the sounds of it. And if you look at Flinders Lane, there are restaurants there that have never delivered food in their life, and now they're suddenly delivering through Providor or through their own delivery mechanism. And so is that innovation? Well, it's actually meeting customer needs, and I think the customers are being innovative as well. We're building stuff for humans, right, at the end of the day. So I think it's about delivering what they need, what they want. Convenience, the three people on this stage all do this. Us less so because we deal more B2B. But I think really what's impressed me in terms of innovation this year is the way that end users or customers have integrated their needs on a basic level with the businesses they used to deal with, particularly using restaurants as an example. I think it's that human interaction that will always demand it's always, necessity is the mother of all invention, and it's never been true in COVID, whether it be, really high-tech stuff or basic fundamental feeding of people. That to me has been the most impressive thing in the last year.
Thank you. And Kallan, close us out.
I think the vaccination, right? I mean, just the medical community coming together to vaccinate the whole world. I mean, that's outside of my scope, but that's been impressive. In Mastercard world, I think I was really proud that we had an Australian startup on our Global Accelerator program last year. That startup was MX51, and I really loved their technology in omnichannel, because if you had a shop where you had a physical store, you really needed to get online quickly, and their cloud-based bank-grade tech stack is awesome, and it partners with banks and acquirers and other people. So it's not a I'm going to disintermediate straight away. So that was a good one. Another one totally off topic that I loved is Peloton. I mean, there's a company that owns the product, the service, the experience, and you couldn't get a better, COVID, company. I think they got lucky in that their business model was accelerated by that, but it's now a $33 billion company, and it's doing spin classes in your own home. So.
Thank you very much. That brings us to the end of our panel. Can you please then thank our panelists?